Well, turn your Bibles, please, to John chapter 3. And we're going to begin John chapter 3 this morning at verse 22. We're in this marvelous series on the Gospel of John. And this morning I want us to see the first and the most important qualification for living a successful Christian life. The most important qualification, actually, for ministry. Most important qualification for leadership. Most important qualification for a preacher, as a matter of fact. Most important qualification for any kind of Bible teacher. The first qualification for ministry is also the most challenging, funny enough, because the moment you think you've attained this quality, you're tempted to lose it. We're talking about the quality of humility. Winston Churchill used to say that his predecessor, Neville Chamberlain, was a very humble man. And then Churchill would add, mind you, he's got plenty to be humble about. Humility, you didn't get that one. Yeah. Humility is one of those qualities that the moment you think you have it, you're in danger of losing it. In fact, you can't even claim to be a humble person. Imagine somebody writing a book entitled Humility and How I Attained It. On the other hand, we can think of people who would be the opposite of humility. Donald Trump said in his book, Crippled America, the most important book in the world is the Bible. Donald Trump said that. And then he added this, and my book is second. Well, we're going to learn from John the Baptist this morning some things about humility. Jesus called John the Baptist the greatest man who ever lived. Matthew 11:11, Jesus says, of all who have ever lived, none is greater than John the Baptist. Well, how about that? We're going to learn about humility from a guy who's called the greatest man who ever lived. But remember, he never claimed to be the greatest. Jesus said, humility is the pathway to greatness. Our text this morning is John chapter 3, 22, all the way through to verse 36, and we'll only get a quarter way through it this morning. We'll chop it off and we'll pick up part 2 next time, week after next Sunday's Mother's Day. But John the Baptist gives us some amazingly marvelous characteristics of humility. Now I want to begin right in the middle of the chapter just by way of introducing it to you. Look at verse 30, because this verse sums up the entire passage. This is the definition of humility. John the Baptist says it. Here's what he says. He, meaning Christ, must increase, but I must decrease. There's the greatest definition of humility anywhere in the Scriptures. The greatest man who ever lived said, he must increase, I must decrease. That's a far cry from what Satan told Eve in Genesis chapter 3. You will be like God. That's a far cry from what our culture will tell you. Our culture will tell you that you are your own God. Our culture will tell you that you must increase. Our culture will tell you, forget about what God says. Our culture will tell you, make your own rules. Forget about God's rules. Advance your own interests. Christ is merely a Sunday school word. This is a cultural collision. He must increase. I must decrease. If John were saying that today in our culture, in our language, maybe he would say it something like this. It's all about elevating him, not me. The Apostle Paul would say exactly the same thing. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 15. He died for all so that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him, who for their sake died and was raised again. It's all about him, not me. John's job was to announce the coming Messiah. sort of like blowing the trumpet in the parade before the main event arrives, sort of like the master of ceremonies. But once the star of the show is on stage, the master of ceremonies slips behind the curtain. That's sort of John's job. He's heralding the coming of the Messiah. John knows that John is merely a star that shines in the night and fades away in the light of the morning dawn. He must increase, I must decrease. It's all about him. It's not about me. Now, that tells us that humility has two aspects to it. It produces a downward movement of me and an upward movement of him. Humility is not really about becoming humble. Humility is not about wringing your hands and saying, I'm not worthy. Humility is not about telling people that you are nothing special. It's not about you telling people that, oh, I don't have very much to offer, I'm just a humble person. The more you do that, the more attention you're drawing to yourself. Humility is about getting the attention off of me and advancing Christ. It's about lifting up Christ. The mark of a great preacher is not when people come away saying, what a great preacher. But when they leave saying, what a great God, what a great gospel, what a great book, what a magnificent Christ. He must increase. I must decrease. It's not about me. It's all about him. So that's John the Baptist. Humility. Most important qualification for a successful Christian life. Most important qualification for ministry. Most important qualification, by the way, to build a successful marriage. Humility. So what does humility look like in action? Well, the amazing thing about John is that John does not simply define humility, John demonstrates it. John doesn't simply talk a good game. It's one thing to speak, it's another thing to behave, to act, and to demonstrate. It's one thing to say he must increase and I must decrease. It's an entirely other thing altogether to prove it. And he does. John proves it by modeling humility. So let me show you. We'll just get through the first couple here this morning before we quit. Here's the first of 5 characteristics of humility. Number 1, humility is not stubborn. Look at verses 22 to 24. After this, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside. And Jesus remained there with them and was baptizing. John also was baptizing at Aenon near Salem, because water was plentiful there, and people were coming and being baptized. For John had not yet been put in prison. Now, a couple of things to note here as little side notes before I get into the main point. First, Baptists love that wee phrase. John was baptizing there because water was plentiful there. See, that's a great evidence that John baptized by full immersion. You need plentiful water, deep water. If you're going to baptize by immersion, if you're baptizing by pouring or by sprinkling water over their heads, you don't need a lot of water, but he's fully immersing them head to toe because you need plentiful water in order to do that. So Baptists love that verse. We love that wee verse, and I couldn't bypass it without pointing that out to you. Now, the second thing to notice, verse 24, little parenthesis. John had not yet been put in prison. John the Apostle inserts that there because the other 3 gospel writers do not include this event in this passage. The other 3 Gospels jump from Jesus' baptism all the way to John's imprisonment and subsequent beheading, tragically. And they do not include this section. So John the Apostle tells us that this section happened before John went to prison, because John doesn't want his readers to get confused, because the other three Gospels have been around for decades, and John's Gospel is being written last, and John doesn't want anybody confused to read this little section and say, we haven't heard of this before, it's not in any of the other three Gospels, and so what's going on here? And John is letting us know that this event happened after Jesus' baptism, before John's arrest, so that nobody's confused. It's a wonderful example of the care that's being taken to make sure that everybody knows that all of this is accurate, detailed, factual, historical documentation. Now watch this. You'll find this very, very interesting. Notice John is baptizing at Aenon near Salem. So where is that? Well, two places have been identified as possibilities for this site. Both of them are in Samaria. John's location for baptizing has changed. Matthew chapter 3 verse 1, Mark chapter 1 verse 5 says that John was baptizing in Judea. That's where all the people are. Mark chapter 1 verse 5 says, all of the country of Judea and all of Jerusalem were going out to John the Baptist and being baptized by John. John is ministering in Judea, but here John is baptizing in Samaria, at Aenon. It's a little backwater town with no zip code. That's why we have trouble locating its exact location today. Now, why on earth would John change locations from Judea to Aenon? Because Jesus is baptizing in Judea. Verse 22 tells us that. Jesus was baptizing in Judea. John has moved over to Salem to give Jesus the more prominent location. John could have said, I was here first. Go find some other watering hole. John could have been stubborn. John could have dug his heels in. John could have said, I have first rights here. John could have demanded. John could have said, this is my place. This is my spot. I got it first. I stake my claim. But John gives up a spot. He relinquishes his rights. Why? Verse 30. Because he must increase, I must decrease. It's all about him. It's not about me. Jesus did exactly the same thing in Philippians chapter 2. In Philippians chapter 2 it says, though Jesus was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God something to be grasped, something to be held on to, something to be stubbornly demanded. But he emptied himself, gave it up, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, be found in human form, he humbled himself, Paul tells us. Humility is not stubborn. Jesus relinquished his rights. Same as John the Baptist relinquished his rights. Because humility is not stubborn. When Belinda and I were first married 30 years ago, our first Christmas together, I announced to Belinda that the Christmas tree would be going up on the 1st of December. She announced, no, the Christmas tree goes up the week before Christmas. In fact, I think she even said the day before Christmas or something ridiculous like that. I said, no, it doesn't. Everybody knows the Christmas tree goes up the beginning of December. She said, no, it goes up the week before Christmas. And so back and forth it went. Day after day, arguing and stubbornly digging my heels in, telling her, and this went on through November. Until one day the Holy Spirit reminded me that this was really, really dumb. And it really doesn't matter. And I ought to quit being so stubborn and quit insisting that I'm right. And that life is not about me and what I want, but it's about Him and what He wants. So I went to her and I said, look, I've been thinking about this, and I really don't care when the Christmas tree goes up. Let's put it up the week before Christmas. And she said, well, I've been thinking too. And I say we put up the Christmas tree the first week of December. I said, no, it's going up the week before Christmas. She said, no, it's not. James chapter 3 says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? You want something and you can't get it. We get upset and fuss and fight and quarrel and complain because we can't get what we want. Or somebody steps over us. Or somebody doesn't respect us. Or we get asked to do a bit more than what we're supposed to do or what's expected of us. And we feel that that's unfair. And we say, I want things done my way. Or we get treated unfairly. And we say, how dare you? And we demand our rights. And we fight for our rights. And humility's not stubborn. Humility is the ability to let things go. Humility is the ability to give up your rights. Humility is the ability to not insist on your own way. Humility is the ability to not get offended. To not have to win every fight. Because it's all about Him. It's not about me. He must increase. I must decrease. Humility can drain the tension out of a marriage, or out of a friendship, or out of an unresolved conflict faster than bath water pouring down the drain. Humility is not stubborn. John the Baptist knew of what he spoke. These were not just words for John. He must increase, I must decrease. And these must not simply be words for us around here. This is our motto. This is what we must live by. This is not a game. This is how we must live. He must increase. This is how we're supposed to live. He must increase, I must decrease. Humility also doesn't complain. Humility isn't stubborn. And secondly, humility doesn't complain. Look at verse 25. Now, a discussion arose between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. They're having an argument about baptism because John's baptism was a baptism of repentance and symbolic purification. So the debate is about baptism. Verse 26 tells us exactly what the debate was about. They came to John, and they said to John, Rabbi, he who was with you, that's Jesus, across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he's baptizing. That's actually not correct. Chapter 4, verse 2 says that Jesus himself did not baptize anybody, but only his disciples. The disciples were doing the baptism. That makes sense. Jesus did the teaching, the disciples did the baptizing, because the disciples were too immature to handle the teaching at this point. So Jesus delegated the baptizing to them. Now here's the rub. He is baptizing, and all are going to him. Imagine. There must have been thousands of people following John when John started his ministry. I mean, John is the most popular guy in town when he first starts his ministry. Mark chapter 1, verse 5 says this. Listen to this. All the country of Judea and all of Jerusalem were going out to John to be baptized by him. Everybody loved John. Everybody accepted that John was a prophet. Right up there with the prophets of the Old Testament. And there's thousands, maybe even tens of thousands, following John. The crowds were huge. But now, everybody's leaving John and flocking to Jesus. Jesus' star is on the rise, and John's is burning out. I mean, if that were today, John's crowds at the beginning were filling the Rogers Stadium. Now, they're filling basements. And Jesus is filling stadiums. And these guys are concerned for John and his ministry. And notice they even stick the knife in. He who was with you across the Jordan. In other words, John, he was your partner. John, you baptized him. He was with you. And then they stick the knife in further. He's the one to whom you bore witness. You promoted him, John. They're almost accusing Jesus of treachery and betrayal. You helped him, John. You elevated his status. You gave him credibility. And now look what he's doing. He's taken over. John, you've been used. After all the things that you did for him, John, now he's become your rival. He's the competition. John, come on, let's complain a bit here. Don't you feel jealous? Don't you feel used? Don't you feel discarded? Don't you feel some self-pity? Look what John answers in verse 27. A person cannot receive even one thing unless it's given to him from heaven. You know, there's two remarkable things about that verse. The first is what is not said. The second is what is said. Here's what's not said. There is not a single word of complaint, negativity, whining, self-pity. Because humility doesn't complain. He must increase. I must decrease. It's all about him. It's not about me. See, complaining is often the result of comparing. We complain because we compare. Somebody else seems to be better off than me, and I compare myself with their lot in life, and so I complain. Or I compare my lot in life with what I was expecting whenever this whole thing first started, and because where I am doesn't fit where I thought I was going to be, I complain. My dreams were not what they were at the start, and so I compare and I complain. John doesn't compare. Because he must increase, I must decrease. It's all about him, it's not about me. It's interesting, the parallel between love and humility. 1 Corinthians 13 says love does not compare either. There's two ways that we compare. We compare up and we compare down. We compare with people who are higher than us, something that we want from them, and we compare down, people that we think we're better than. 1 Corinthians 13 says, love does not envy. Love does not compare up. Love does not crave what other people have. On the other hand, love also does not compare down. Love does not envy. Love does not what? Boast. What's that mean? It means love does not compare down. It doesn't look down on people. It doesn't think that it's better than other people. It doesn't have an air of superiority, that I'm better than you and therefore I can boast. Love and humility walk hand in hand. Love does not compare. Humility does not compare. And so because it doesn't compare, it doesn't complain. It doesn't get jealous. It doesn't whine. It doesn't feel used. By the way, humility is the sure cure when somebody hurts you, when somebody offends you, when somebody insults you, mistreats you, uses you. Humility is the only way to get over that. Because humility takes your eyes off your pain and puts them on Christ's pain. Humility focuses your attention on the cross. He must increase. My focus is on Him. And when your focus is on His pain, your focus is off of your pain. That's exactly what Hebrews 12:2 says. Consider Him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. That's why humility doesn't complain, because it doesn't compare. It's all about Him. It's not about me. He must increase. I must decrease. Well, let's stop right there. We'll pick up the other three qualities of humility next time. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this magnificent passage of Scripture. For our brother, John the Baptist, greatest man who ever lived. Yet what an example to us of humility. Lord, help us to see that the mark of humility is a sign of strength. Help us, Lord, to exalt Christ, to elevate Christ, to love Christ, to live a life that is aimed to please Christ and not ourselves. We love Christ. We want to be like Him because He is worthy. In Christ's strong, magnificent, majestic, and matchless name, we pray. Amen.